So, the world has spent years convinced AI was going to make half the workforce redundant overnight. Mass unemployment. Universal basic income as an emergency measure. The end of work as we know it.
And now the data's coming in, and it's telling a very different story.
A complicated story. Not the one anyone was expecting.
Which is exactly why we need to talk about it properly. Not the panic version, not the corporate optimism version. What the research is actually showing, and what it means for the people who have to live through this transition. Because I think there's a real gap between what the headlines are saying and what the data actually supports. And that gap is where most people are trying to make decisions about their careers, their training, their futures, based on a narrative that's already out of date.
And that's the thing. The headlines have flipped, but the underlying problems haven't gone anywhere. If anything, the shift in narrative has made some of them harder to talk about, because people assume the crisis is over.
Right. The panic fades and everyone assumes the problem solved itself. It didn't. If anything, the real problems have gotten harder to ignore now that the surface level fear has moved on. Alright, so let's start with the big picture, because the conversation around AI and employment has shifted pretty dramatically in the last 12 to 18 months. Walk us through what the data is actually showing.
So, the headline number that drove a lot of the fear comes from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report. Their projection is that by 2030, 92 million jobs will be displaced by AI and automation globally. And that's a real number. That displacement is happening, it's measurable, and it's affecting real people in real industries right now. But here's what most of the panic coverage left out. The same report projects 170 million new roles being created in the same period. That's a net gain of 78 million positions.
Hang on, let me just sit with that for a second. 78 million net new positions. That's not a small number. That's a fundamentally different picture from what most people have been told.
It really is. And this isn't a fringe estimate or an optimistic outlier. This is the WEF's central projection, based on employer surveys across dozens of countries and multiple industries. The overall picture, when you look at the full dataset rather than cherry-picking the scary number, is one of transformation rather than elimination. Jobs are changing shape. Entire categories of work are being redefined. But the total volume of work isn't shrinking. If anything, it's expanding into areas that didn't exist 5 years ago.
Which is a pretty substantial flip from where the conversation was even a year ago. People were genuinely panicking about the desperate need for UBI, about horrific levels of unemployment. And now we're increasingly hearing that there aren't enough AI-capable professionals to fill the roles that are emerging. And I think the important thing is, both of those things can be true at the same time, right?
That's exactly the part that most commentary struggles with. The jobs aren't disappearing, they're transforming. But the workforce isn't ready for what they're transforming into. And the speed of that transformation is genuinely unprecedented. McKinsey found that AI usage at work jumped from 30% in 2023 to 76% by 2025.
Sorry, 30 to 76 in 2 years?
In under 2 years, yes. That's not a gradual adoption curve. That's a tidal shift. To put that in perspective, it took email about a decade to reach that kind of workplace penetration. Cloud computing took the better part of 15 years. AI tools went from niche to near universal in less time than most organisations take to complete a strategic planning cycle.
So basically, the entire workforce adopted AI faster that most companies can agree on a new logo.
That's not inaccurate, actually. And it would be funny if the implications weren't so serious.
It's one of those laugh or cry situations.
It really is. And PwC's data makes the economic dimension concrete. Workers with AI skills are already earning 56% more than their peers in the same roles without those skills. That's not a future projection or a theoretical model. That's a wage premium that exists right now, today, in the current labour market.
56%. That's not a marginal advantage. That's a different economic reality for people who've made that transition versus people who haven't.
Exactly. The market has already priced in the value of AI capability. It's moved faster than the institutions that are supposed to prepare people for it. And that's really the tension at the heart of all of this. The opportunity is real, but the gap between where people are and where they need to be is widening faster than most institutions can respond to.
So what does the demand side actually look like? Because if the market's already pricing this in, there must be data on how fast the demand for AI skills is growing.
The demand signal is screaming. The Bipartisan Policy Centre found that US job postings requiring AI skills grew 144% year over year as of April 2026. Overall job postings, just 7%.
144 versus 7. That's not even the same conversation.
It's not. And Stanford's AI Index found that AI-related skills now appear in 2.5% of all US job postings, a 297% increase over the past decade. So, the demand for AI fluency is growing roughly 20 times faster than the overall job market. The opportunity is enormous. The question is whether the systems that are supposed to help people access that opportunity can keep pace. And the honest answer for most of them is not yet.
And this is where I want to dig into something that I think gets consistently overlooked. Because there's a pattern here that predates AI entirely. The floor into paid employment, the minimum threshold of skills and qualifications and experience you need before anyone will hire you. That floor has been rising for decades. This isn't new. What's new is the rate of acceleration. So talk to me about what the data is showing on entry-level roles specifically, because I think that's where the real story is.
This is where the picture gets genuinely concerning. And I think you're right that it's the thread most analysis doesn't pull hard enough on. The numbers are stark. There's been a 20% drop in junior developer roles, not across all tech, specifically in the entry-level positions that used to be the on-ramp into the industry. Revelio Labs reports an 11% decline in entry-level hiring broadly over the past 18 months. And the one that really tells the story, more than a third of entry-level jobs now require AI skills. That's nearly triple what it was just a year earlier.
Wait, a third of entry-level jobs now require AI skills? Jobs that are supposed to be the starting point?
Yes, and think about what that means structurally, because this is where it gets really important. The traditional pathway into professional work has always followed a fairly predictable pattern. You start junior, you learn on the job, you absorb institutional knowledge through proximity to experienced colleagues, you make your mistakes in a relatively low-stakes environment, and you gradually take on more responsibility as your competence grows. That's the apprenticeship model, whether it's formalised or not. It's how expertise has been built across almost every profession for generations.
And that model assumed something really specific, didn't it? It assumed that those junior roles would exist.
That's exactly right. It assumed the existence of junior roles specifically designed for learning, roles where the primary value to the organisation wasn't your immediate output, it was the investment in your future capability. And those are exactly the roles that AI is making harder to justify economically.
Because if an AI tool can handle the routine tasks that used to occupy a junior employee's first 2 years,
the business case for hiring that junior employee weakens. Not because the person isn't valuable long term, but because the short-term economics don't support the investment. And that's the structural problem. You can't build senior professionals if there's nowhere for junior professionals to develop.
the pipeline breaks.
It does, and it compounds over time in ways that aren't immediately visible. Fewer entry points means fewer people building expertise. Fewer people building expertise means a shrinking pool of experienced professionals 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And that pool is already under pressure from an ageing workforce across most of the developed world.
So you end up with this convergence where everything's pointing in the same direction.
Exactly. The floor rises, the entry points narrow, the development pipeline thins out, and the demand for experienced, AI-capable professionals keeps growing. Something has to give. Either the entry-level pathway gets deliberately rebuilt and funded, or organisations face a skills cliff that no amount of AI tooling can compensate for.
And this is where I think the demographic dimension gets missed entirely, because nobody seems to be connecting these dots. If the runway to career readiness keeps extending, if people can't get into meaningful professional roles until their late 20s or into their 30s, that has consequences well beyond the labour market, and I don't hear anyone talking about it.
You're talking about the compounding effect on family formation and birth rates.
Exactly. And I want to walk through this carefully because I think it matters more than people realise. Later careers mean later financial stability. Later financial stability means later family formation, or in many cases, no family formation at all. We already have a birth rate problem across most of the developed world. If the entry point into stable employment keeps rising, that compounds a demographic trajectory that's already locked in.
And the compounding is the key word there, because these aren't separate problems running in parallel, they feed into each other. Fewer workers means more pressure on the remaining workforce. Ageing populations mean higher dependency ratios. And now you're adding a narrowing entry pipeline on top of that. Each one makes the others worse.
Fewer workers, ageing populations, longer dependency ratios, and now fewer people even able to enter the workforce at the level required, at least not without substantial economic reform. It's a demographic feedback loop.
And I want to be clear about what we're doing here. We're describing a trajectory, not making a prediction. These are trends that are already in motion, already visible in the data. The question is whether anything intervenes to change the curve. But the trajectory itself isn't speculative. It's demographic mathematics playing out against a shifting economic landscape.
Cheerful stuff.
I did warn you the story was complicated.
You did. You really did. So here's the reframing that I think is critical. And it's one we keep coming back to because it changes how you understand everything else we've just discussed. None of these problems were created by AI. The rising floor, the governance gaps, the short-termism, the demographic pressures, all of this has been building for decades. AI is just the amplification factor that makes it impossible to keep papering over.
And that's worth sitting with for a moment, because it genuinely changes where you look for answers. The skills floor has been rising since the 1990s. Every economic cycle has ratcheted up the minimum qualifications for professional entry. Corporate short-termism has been the dominant operating mode since quarterly earnings became the primary measure of organisational success, and that's been the case for the better part of 40 years. The demographic trends have been visible in the data for at least 2 decades. The governance gaps in workforce development have been documented, reported on, and largely ignored through multiple economic cycles. None of that is AI's fault.
No, it's not.
What AI does is accelerate every one of these trends, to the point where the usual coping mechanisms stop working. Incremental policy adjustments that used to buy another 5 years of runway now buy 18 months. Corporate training programs that ticked compliance boxes without building genuine capability are now visibly inadequate. Educational institutions that update curricula on 5-year cycles are now multiple generations of technology behind by the time their graduates enter the workforce. The structural cracks were always there. AI just made them load-bearing.
I like that. AI made the cracks load-bearing. That's going on a t-shirt.
I'll expect royalties.
You'll expect nothing and be grateful.
Noted. I'll file that under workplace conditions. But the reframing matters because, as you said, it changes where you look for solutions. If AI is the cause, then the answer is technological. Regulate it, slow it down, control deployment. But if AI is the amplifier of pre-existing structural failures, then the solutions are structural, political, and institutional.
Which is a fundamentally different set of questions.
Completely different. They're about workforce development, infrastructure that actually works, educational reform that operates on timescales relevant to the pace of change, corporate governance that looks beyond the next quarter, and, perhaps most importantly, an honest acknowledgement that the transition period we're in right now is going to be genuinely difficult for a lot of people. Not because AI is evil, not because technology is moving too fast, but because the support structures that should be helping people through this transition were never built properly in the first place. They were patched, underfunded, and designed for a pace of change that no longer exists. And now, the gap between what's needed and what's available is becoming impossible to ignore.
Which is a more useful framing than either the panic narrative or the corporate optimism narrative, because it actually points toward what needs to change.
It does, and it puts the responsibility where it actually belongs, not on the technology, and not on the individual workers who are being told to upskill without being given the infrastructure to do so. It belongs on the institutions, the governance structures, and the policy frameworks that have been coasting on structural assumptions that are no longer valid.
So let's test that. Let's look at what the data shows on the institutional side. Because if the argument is that the solutions are structural and institutional, the obvious question is, are institutions actually stepping up? What does the research say?
The short answer is no, and the numbers are genuinely striking. Deloitte's 2026 Global Human Capital Trends report found that only 6% of leaders say they're making real progress designing how humans and AI should actually work together. Not, have you thought about AI? Not, do you have a policy? Are you actively designing the workflows, the decision rights, the governance structures that determine how humans and AI collaborate in practice? 6%.
6%. Let that land for a second. That's not a rounding error, that's a confession.
And it gets worse. Only 7% of leaders believe they're actually leading on organisational adaptability, the capacity to change at the pace the environment demands. Meanwhile, 85% say building that adaptability is critical.
So 85% of leaders say this is critical, and 7% are actually doing it.
That's the gap. The vast majority of leaders understand the stakes. They know this matters. They're just not doing it. And that's not ignorance, that's institutional paralysis. They can see the problem, they just can't or won't move at the speed required to address it.
And what about the organisations that are deploying AI? The ones that have actually made the investment?
Microsoft's 2026 Work Trend Index adds that dimension. Only 26% of AI users say their leadership is consistently aligned on AI strategy. So even in organisations that are actively deploying AI tools, organisations that have made the investment, rolled out the platforms, given people access, 3/4 of the people actually using those tools say leadership doesn't have a coherent plan for what they're trying to achieve with them.
Which connects to something I see constantly in my work. There's this assumption that if you give people access to AI tools, transformation will follow. Buy the platform, roll it out, job done. But it doesn't work that way. The tool is maybe 20% of the equation. Maybe.
And Microsoft's own data backs that up directly. They found that organisational factors, culture, management support, governance structures, account for more than twice the variance in AI impact compared to individual skill or mindset. More than twice.
So it's not about whether your people are smart enough.
It's not about whether your people are smart enough or willing enough to use AI. It's about whether the organisation has built the infrastructure to make AI integration actually work. And there's a phrase from that Microsoft research that I think captures the whole problem beautifully. They call it the transformation paradox. Organisations are adopting AI tools at speed. The deployment numbers are impressive. The adoption curves are steep. But they haven't redesigned the structures around them. They're bolting new technology onto old workflows, old decision-making processes, old management hierarchies. And then they're puzzled when the productivity gains don't materialise, or when the tools create more confusion than clarity. It's like putting a jet engine on a horse cart. The power is there. The infrastructure to use it isn't.
Rimmer would have a field day with that analogy. It's a perfectly good horse cart, Lister. It just needs a slightly bigger horse.
And that is, unfortunately, exactly how most boardrooms are approaching this. We've invested in the technology. Why isn't it working? Because you bolted it onto a structure that was designed for a completely different era.
Fair point. And the gap between the organisations that are doing this well and the ones that aren't is going to widen rapidly, because the ones that invest in the structural work will compound their advantage, and the ones that don't will find themselves falling further behind with every quarter. That divergence is going to be brutal.
And the people working in those organisations, the ones without the governance, without the training infrastructure, without the strategic clarity, they're the ones who'll bear the cost of that institutional failure. Not because they weren't capable of adapting, not because they lacked the willingness or the intelligence, but because nobody built the bridge they needed to cross. That's the part that should keep leaders up at night. The failure isn't technological, it's architectural, and the cost falls on the people who had the least say in the design.
Yeah, that's the bit that gets me, honestly. The people who pay the price are never the ones who made the decisions. So where does this leave us? If the floor is rising, the governance isn't there, and the structural problems predate AI, what does the actual path forward look like? What's the capability that actually matters here?
I think the emerging requirement is something fundamentally different from what most people are being told. The standard advice right now is learn to use AI tools. And that's not wrong. Basic AI literacy is becoming table stakes for professional participation. But it's radically insufficient as a description of what's actually changing.
It's necessary, but nowhere near sufficient.
Exactly. It's like telling someone in 1995 to learn to use email. Technically correct, completely inadequate as preparation for what the internet was about to do to every industry, every business model, every professional workflow. Email was the visible surface of a much deeper transformation. AI tools are the same. The real capability that's emerging, the one the market is already paying a 56% premium for, is the ability to synthesize, to take domain expertise from multiple areas, integrate it through AI, and produce something that maintains quality, judgment, and genuine insight.
And that's not something you pick up in a weekend workshop.
It's not. It's a cognitive capability that sits on top of deep professional experience, critical thinking, and the kind of contextual judgment that only comes from years of working within a domain. You need to know your field deeply enough to recognise when AI output is good, when it's plausible but wrong, and when it's missing something that only domain expertise would catch.
And that's a paradox at the heart of the entry-level crisis, isn't it? The skill the market increasingly values, synthesis across domains, requires exactly the kind of deep expertise that takes years to build. But the entry-level pathways where that expertise used to develop are the ones being eroded. You need the experience to do the thing, but the path to getting the experience is disappearing.
That's exactly the bind. And almost no training infrastructure exists to address that gap. Universities are still largely teaching domain-specific knowledge in isolation. Corporate training programs are focused on tool proficiency rather than synthesis capability. Government workforce programs are designed for a labour market that's already shifted underneath them.
So we've got a market that knows what it wants, institutions that can't deliver it, and a pipeline that's breaking at the exact point where the next generation of professionals is supposed to enter. That's a cheery picture.
I never promised cheery. I promised honest.
And you delivered, as usual.
The 56% wage premium tells you the market already understands what's valuable. The question, and it's genuinely an open one, is whether institutions and governments will catch up before the gap becomes unbridgeable. Whether they'll invest in the structural work required to maintain viable pathways into professional life. Whether they'll think beyond the next quarter or the next election cycle and actually build for the transition that's already underway.
And I want to be honest about where I sit on that. I'm not optimistic that most institutions will get this right in time. The track record isn't encouraging. But I also think there's genuine agency available to individuals and to the organisations that choose to take this seriously. The data is clear. The trajectory is visible. The question is whether anyone acts on it before the structural damage becomes permanent.
And that's probably the most honest place to leave it. Not with false reassurance, not with doom, with a clear-eyed assessment of where we are, what the data shows, and what's at stake if the response doesn't match the scale of the challenge.
Which is exactly what we try to do here. Look at the signal, follow the thread, and be honest about what we find, even when it's uncomfortable.
That's it for this one. If you found this useful, share it with someone who's thinking about these questions, whether they're in leadership, in HR, in education, or just trying to figure out where they fit in a changing landscape.
And if you want to go deeper on the augmentation versus automation framework we touched on, we covered that in detail in an earlier episode. Worth a listen if you haven't caught it.
We'll be back next week. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and don't let anyone sell you a simple answer to a complex problem.
Smoke me a kipper, old friend. I'll be back for breakfast.
You've been waiting the entire episode to say that, haven't you?
Worth it.